This is eternal human spirit, where every story proves why humanity never breaks.
The capture and mockery. The prison chamber was cold and silent, filled with the smell of metal and damp stone. The walls glowed faintly with strange alien lights that seemed alive, flickering like the eyes of hidden predators. Heavy footsteps echoed through the long corridor. Dragging behind them the sound of chains scraping the floor, the human prisoner was brought in, his body thin, bruised, and bleeding from old wounds. His clothes were torn, his face pale, but his eyes still burned with something that made the guards uneasy. They had seen many prisoners before, aliens, rebels, creatures from different stars, but never one who stared at them with such quiet defiance. Two towering guards pushed him forward, their armor shining with cruel sharp edges, their reptilian faces twisted into cruel grins. They shoved him to his knees in the center of the chamber. The commander stepped forward, tall and broad, his skin covered with dark scales that glistened under the dim light. His voice was sharp, cutting the silence like a blade. "So this is the human everyone talks about," the commander said, his lips curling in amusement. "This is the fragile species that dares to stand against the Empire." The guards laughed, a low, rumbling sound that echoed against the chamber walls. They mocked him, calling humans weak, calling Earth a dying rock. They whispered about how easy it would be to break his mind, his spirit, and his body. But the human did not answer. He raised his head slowly, his eyes meeting the commander's without fear. His lips trembled slightly, but not from weakness. It was from the cold air that surrounded him. He clenched his jaw and stared, silent and unbroken. The commander leaned closer, his sharp teeth flashing in the glow. "Do you know what we will do to you, human?" he asked. "We will tear apart your memories, your hopes, your very soul. You will beg for mercy before long." Still, the human gave no answer. His silence was heavier than any scream. It unsettled the guards, made them shift uncomfortably in their places. For them, silence was not resistance. It was defiance. It was strength. The commander's smile faded for a brief moment. His eyes narrowed, searching the prisoner's face for fear. But instead of terror, he saw a strange calm. The human's gaze was steady, almost challenging, as if saying, "You will fail." "Chain him to the wall," the commander ordered, his voice sharper than before. "We will see how long his silence lasts." The guards obeyed, slamming the prisoner against the cold metal wall. They locked heavy cuffs around his wrists and ankles, the chains rattling like hungry serpents. One guard spat near him, muttering, "You will scream soon, human." They all do. But the human only closed his eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. His chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm, even as pain shot through his arms and legs from the tight cuffs. He remembered. Faces. The family he left behind. The comrades who had fallen beside him. He held on to those memories like fire in his heart. The commander circled him like a predator, his eyes filled with curiosity and cruelty. "I have seen stronger beings break in less than a day," he said. "I give you no more than a few hours. Your kind is fragile, made of weak flesh and weaker spirit." The guards laughed again, echoing the words of their leader. Their laughter filled the chamber, rising higher and louder until it seemed to press against the walls themselves. But even surrounded by that cruel sound, the human remained silent, his head lifted, his eyes fixed on the commander. He was beaten, but not bowed. Finally, the commander stopped in front of him once more, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for the prisoner. "We will shatter your spirit," he hissed, "and when you beg for mercy, when you finally surrender, we will record your cries and play them for the galaxy to hear. They will know humans are nothing but weak animals." For a long moment, there was only silence. The guards waited for the prisoner to speak, to curse, or to finally break. Instead, the human opened his cracked lips. His voice was low, raspy, but filled with fire. "You will fail," The words echoed softly through the chamber, but they cut, deeper than any weapon. The guards froze, their grins fading. The commander's eyes narrowed in anger, but also something else: unease. That night, as the human hung from the chains, bleeding and trembling, the guards whispered among themselves, "Why does he not scream? Why does he not fear?" And in the darkness of the chamber, the human prisoner closed his eyes, whispering silently to himself, "I will not break." It was only the beginning, but already the aliens had begun to understand a truth they had never faced before. This prisoner was not like the others. He was human, and humans did not shatter. The chamber that held the human became a place of cruel experiments, a theater where the aliens believed they would watch a man collapse into screams and broken pleas. The guards were eager to prove their commander right, eager to see the fragile creature finally bend to their methods. They started with pain. The kind of pain that had crushed countless other species in only hours. Sharp electric currents were sent through the chains that bound his body. Each surge forced his muscles to spasm, his teeth to grind against each other, and his breath to leave in short bursts. But still, the human refused to give them the sound they wanted most. He would not scream. At first, the guards laughed, amused by the way his body twitched and shook under the shocks. They called him names, mocking him as weak, mocking Earth as nothing but a planet of soft prey. The commander stood with arms folded, his cold eyes fixed on the prisoner, waiting for that moment when the silence would finally break into cries of surrender. But minute after minute passed, and the human simply clenched his jaw, his lips bleeding from biting down so hard, his face twisted with pain. But his eyes, they remained steady, filled with the same quiet fire as before. That look unsettled them more than any cry would have. When pain alone failed, they turned to hunger. They left him chained for days without food, only a small cup of dirty water pushed toward him as if he were less than an animal. The guards joked that soon his body would weaken and his mind would follow. They waited, expecting him to beg, to cry out for even a small piece of bread, but he did not. Instead, he closed his eyes and seemed to drift into himself, remembering places far from the chamber. He pictured the blue sky of Earth, the sound of waves against the shore, the laughter of his friends, the warmth of family dinners. These memories were his armor, stronger than the chains, stronger than the emptiness clawing at his stomach. The commander grew frustrated. He entered the cell one night, standing so close that the foul scent of his scaled body filled the air. He leaned down and hissed, "You cannot survive like this. You are nothing but weak flesh. You will beg. You will break." The human lifted his head slowly, and though his lips were cracked and his body shaking, he forced a smile. It was small, but it was enough to enrage the commander. That smile was not of someone who was beaten. It was of someone who refused to surrender. The punishments grew worse. His wounds were reopened, his skin marked by whips made of alien steel. The sound of each strike echoed, the guards laughing as the weapon tore into flesh. But no matter how many times the whip fell, the human did not scream. Instead, he bit back every sound, letting only a low growl escape his throat. The commander realized something dangerous, that every attempt to break him only made his spirit stronger. He was not merely enduring pain, he was using it, turning it into defiance. And the longer he remained silent, the more restless the guards became. Some even stopped laughing, glancing nervously at each other as if questioning the very nature of the man they thought they would easily destroy. By the end of the first week, the chamber had changed. What was once a place of alien control was now a battlefield of wills. The commander still believed victory was near, but deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow. He had expected a fragile creature of flesh, but what stood before him in chains was something far stronger, something unbroken. And though the human's body shook with exhaustion, his silence roared louder than any cry. The mind games. When pain and hunger failed to shatter the prisoner, The commander turned to another weapon. Illusion. He knew that sometimes the mind could be broken when the body could not. So the aliens built tricks within the chamber. They used their advanced machines to project voices, faces, and memories. The human was awakened one night to the soft sound of a woman's voice, a voice that sounded like his mother calling his name. For a moment, his heart skipped, his eyes flickered with longing, but then he saw the cold walls of the chamber, the faint blue glow of the machines, and he understood. It was a trap. He closed his eyes, refusing to answer, refusing to let them touch his spirit. The illusions grew stronger. They showed him visions of Earth burning, cities falling under, alien fire. They showed him comrades captured, begging for their lives. They promised him freedom if only he would kneel and swear loyalty. The commander himself whispered, "Why fight for a doomed world? Your people are already gone. Save yourself and live." But the human only shook his head. His lips cracked into words barely above a whisper. "You lie." His voice, weak but steady, cut through the false images, shattering them more effectively than any machine could. The guards grew angry with his stubbornness. They turned the illusions cruel. They showed him his family crying out, suffering because of him. They whispered in his ears for hours, filling his mind with endless noise, trying to drown his will. Yet every time, the human found one single anchor. His belief, his unshakable truth that no matter what they showed him, his people still fought. Humanity did not bow, not even to empires. He clung to that belief, repeating it silently within his heart until the illusions faded into meaningless shadows. The commander could not hide his frustration anymore. He slammed his fist against the metal wall, his eyes burning with fury. "Why will you not break?" he shouted. "We offer you relief. We offer you escape, and still you resist. What drives you, human? What makes you so unwilling to surrender?" The human lifted his head, his body frail and trembling, but his voice steady. "Because surrender is not in us. Because even if I fall, another will rise, and even if all of us fall, the idea of freedom will rise again." The words unsettled the chamber. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. They had always believed humans were weak, but this prisoner's words were like fire in the darkness, fire that could not be extinguished. The commander turned away, his fists clenched, for he realized something terrible. This was not just one man resisting. This was the strength of an entire species burning inside a single prisoner. And no illusion, no lie, no torture could strip that away. Breaking point that never came. The alien commander believed there was always a breaking point, a final moment when even the strongest spirit bent under the weight of pain and despair. He had seen it countless times before. Rebels, warriors, leaders of other species, all of them had eventually screamed, begged, or collapsed into silence when their will was stolen. The human, however, was rewriting those rules. Weeks passed. Inside the chamber, and though his body grew frail, though his voice became little more than a whisper, his spirit remained unbroken. The chains rattled whenever he tried to move, and every step or breath was soaked in agony. But he refused to bow, and that refusal was becoming a greater weapon than any army could wield. The commander changed his methods once more, deciding to break the human not just with pain or illusion, but with humiliation. He brought in alien soldiers and made them gather in the chamber, a crowd of watchers eager to see the moment when the fragile creature from Earth finally begged for mercy. They jeered, mocked, and hurled words meant to crush pride. They spat on him, calling him filth, calling his people nothing but insects crawling in the shadow of the galaxy's true masters. Yet the human, battered and trembling, simply lifted his head and looked back at them with the same steady eyes. He said nothing, but his silence was sharper than any insult. It was a mirror, reflecting their cruelty back at them, and, in that reflection, Some of the soldiers saw not weakness, but strength they could not comprehend. When silence did not work, the commander raised the cruelty further. He ordered the human to stand while chained, forcing his body into painful positions. For hours at a time, his legs shook, his muscles spasmed, sweat poured down his battered skin, but still he stood, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the walls, as though seeing a sky only he could remember. Sometimes he collapsed, crashing to the floor, only to be dragged upright again. And when the commander sneered at him, asking, "Why rise again when you know you will fall?" the human whispered, "Because rising again is what it means to be human." Those words spread through the chamber like fire, searing into the minds of both the guards and their commander, for it was not just an answer, it was a challenge to everything they believed. The commander grew desperate, and in his desperation, he made mistakes. He began to lose his composure, his carefully built mask of superiority cracking each time the human endured another trial. One night, he entered the chamber alone, his scaled face twisted with frustration. He slammed his clawed hand against the wall, the noise echoing like thunder. "You cannot resist forever," he shouted, his voice filled with rage. "Even steel bends, even stars die. Why do you not yield?" The human, beaten and bruised, lifted his head slowly, his eyes glowing with quiet fire despite the exhaustion in his body. He answered with a calmness that shook the commander to his core. "Because my will is not yours to take. You may chain my body, but my spirit belongs only to me." That moment was the turning point, not for the human, but for the aliens themselves. Some of the guards, once eager to laugh at his suffering, now began to hesitate when ordered to hurt him. They carried out their duties slower, their blows less certain, and their eyes carried questions they dared not speak. The prisoner, through nothing but endurance, was planting doubt in the very empire that sought to crush him. The commander saw this change and grew fearful, though he would never admit it aloud. He realized that every day the human survived, every second he refused to bow, he was becoming more than a prisoner. He was becoming a symbol. The commander tried one final test, one he believed would bring the man to his knees. He ordered the lights dimmed until the chamber was wrapped in complete darkness. For days, the human was left chained without sound, without food, without sight, only endless black. The goal was to strip away his sense of self, to leave him lost in a void where his mind would turn against him. Yet even there, in the deepest silence, the human found strength. He remembered Earth's skies filled with stars, the laughter of comrades, the warmth of fires on cold nights. He repeated their faces, their voices, their names in his mind, one by one, refusing to let the darkness swallow him. When the lights returned, he was still alive, still breathing, still unbroken, and when the commander demanded to know how he endured, the human gave only one answer: "Because I am not alone, even here." That answer was more dangerous than any weapon. It told the aliens that pain could not kill memory, that chains could not silence loyalty, that even in the coldest darkness, humanity carried with it a light that could not be extinguished. The commander stared at him, silent for the first time, realizing that the human had not just resisted, he had defeated every attempt to take away his will. The breaking point the commander sought had never come, and now he feared it never would. And so the chamber remained, but its atmosphere had changed forever. It was no longer a place where the aliens mocked a prisoner. It was a place where the Empire was forced to confront a truth they did not understand. They had tried to break him, but instead they had revealed something terrifying, that the human spirit, once tested, could rise beyond pain, beyond fear, beyond even death itself. And in the stillness of that night, as the guards exchanged uneasy looks, the human whispered to himself the words that would carry him forward: "I will not break." Humanity's secret weapon, The commander sat alone in his quarters, his sharp claws tapping against the steel table as if each strike could silence the unease crawling inside his chest. For the first time in his long career of war and conquest, doubt was gnawing at him. He had commanded armies that crushed empires, reduced worlds into ash, and enslaved entire species. Never once had a prisoner lasted this long without breaking. The human was not only surviving, he was turning his suffering into a kind of weapon. It was invisible, yet it was striking deeper than blades. The guards whispered about him when they thought no one listened, and that whisper was spreading like fire in a dry field. The commander knew something was changing, something dangerous. It was not his strength of body that was already broken and failing. It was not clever tricks or technology, for he had none to resist the Empire's machines. What terrified the commander was that the humans seemed to hold something entirely alien to them, something beyond logic, beyond fear. At first, he thought, it was madness, some delusion that blinded the man to his suffering, but the longer he studied him, the clearer it became. This was not madness, this was will, pure, raw willpower, sharpened through pain until it had become sharper than any blade. And worse still, that will was not his alone. It was connected to something larger, something that lived in all humans. The commander realized it when he overheard, the prisoner whispering to himself in the dark. The man spoke names softly, almost like prayers. He spoke of his family, his friends, his comrades, all people the aliens had never seen, people who were galaxies away. Yet every time he spoke a name, his breathing steadied, his trembling stopped, his spirit seemed to grow stronger. The commander could not understand it. How could someone gain strength from those who were not even there? How could the thought of others give power enough to endure torture, hunger, and endless humiliation? It was a mystery, and in that mystery, the commander found fear. He ordered the scholars of his empire to analyze the concept, demanding they explain what drove this human. They studied human culture, language, and history, searching for the source of this defiance. They found fragments, words, like hope, loyalty, family, freedom. But none of these words could be fully translated into the Empire's tongue. Their language had words for control, for order, for domination, but not for the stubborn fire that kept this one man alive. The closest word they could find was defiance. Yet even that felt incomplete, for the prisoner was not simply defying them. He was carrying something greater, something unseen yet unbreakable. The guards began to change in subtle ways. They no longer laughed when the human endured punishment. Some avoided his gaze, ashamed of what they were doing. A few even began to wonder if this fragile creature, this small figure chained to a wall, was stronger than all of them. For while they obeyed orders out of fear of their commander, he resisted without fear at all, and in their hearts, an uncomfortable truth began to take root. Perhaps strength was not in whips or chains, but in the spirit that refused to bow to them. One night, during a storm in the outer void, when the ship trembled under the weight of cosmic winds, a young guard asked the prisoner a question no one else dared to speak. "Why?" he whispered, his voice trembling in the darkness. "Why do you endure? Why not surrender? Death would be easier, pain would end. Why hold on?" The human, his voice weak but steady, answered simply, "Because I am not only me. I am the hope of my people. If I break, they break. If I endure, then humanity endures with me." The guard had no reply, but he carried those words with him like a wound, and soon others began to hear them too. The prisoner's defiance spread through the ranks, not like a shout, but like a quiet fire, warming hearts that had long been cold. Even the commander could feel it slipping through his soldiers like sand through his claws, impossible to contain. He realized that the human's secret weapon was not his body, not his strength, not even his endurance. It was something far greater. It was the unshakable belief that no one stands alone, that even in chains, a man could still carry the weight of his people, and that belief was stronger than any empire. The commander grew restless. He tightened his grip on control, ordered stricter discipline, harsher punishments, anything to silence the growing whispers of respect for the prisoner. But it was too late. The human's defiance had already planted itself in the hearts of his enemies. What began as mockery had turned into fascination, and what began as fascination had turned into fear. The commander understood the danger now. Not that the prisoner would escape, but that he had already won. For even chained to a wall, his spirit had broken through the bars and reached places no weapon could touch. And in that realization, the commander trembled. He had spent his life conquering worlds, but here, in the silence of his ship, in the presence of a single broken body that refused to bow, he had met something his empire could never conquer. He had met the true weapon of humanity. And it was not steel, not ships, not armies. It was the spirit that refused to surrender, the spirit that turned pain into strength, silence into defiance, and one man into a symbol that no power in the galaxy could erase. The shift in power. The alien commander once believed fear was the greatest chain. He thought discipline came from terror and loyalty came from punishment. But as days turned into weeks inside the steel corridors of the warship, something unexpected began to happen. Fear no longer belonged to the humans. It was spreading among the aliens themselves. Whispers about the prisoner traveled like smoke through the ranks of soldiers. They had watched him endure pain without breaking, hunger without begging, and illusions without surrender. Some mocked him still, but even in their laughter there was unease, as if every cruel word was an attempt to cover the truth gnawing inside them. This human was not like the others. The guards, once eager to strike him, now hesitated before raising their weapons. Some delivered food without insults. Some even lowered their eyes when they passed his cell. The commander noticed this weakness growing in his ranks, and it enraged him. He demanded harsher punishments, forced the guards to stand watch for hours in silence, and barked threats to anyone who showed signs of doubt. But the more he tried to crush their hesitation, the stronger it seemed to grow. It was not discipline anymore. It was doubt, and doubt spread faster than fire. One evening, the commander summoned the prisoner again to the central chamber. He wanted to end this spectacle once and for all. The human was dragged forward, his body shaking, his skin marked with wounds and bruises. And yet, even in that state, he held his head high, his eyes burning with the same unshakable light. The commander stood before him, his voice thunderous. "You are not a symbol," he snarled. "You are nothing but a broken man chained in my ship. You will die here, and your people will never know your name." But the human answered softly, with a calm that cut deeper than rage. "If I die unbroken, and that is enough, because when you kill me, you will remember me, and your soldiers will remember me, and they will never again believe in your power the way they once did." The words struck like a blade. The commander saw the truth in the eyes of his own guards. Some shifted uncomfortably, their gazes falling to the floor. They had already begun to remember him, not as a prisoner, but as something else, something dangerous, a living reminder that the empire was not invincible. From that day forward, the balance of power began to tilt. It was not the chains or the whips that controlled the chamber anymore. It was the human's presence. The guards found themselves drawn to him, curious about the quiet strength that refused to bend. Some asked questions in hushed tones when the commander was not watching. "How do you endure?" they whispered. "How can you smile after so much pain?" And each time, the human answered with words that seemed simple but carried the weight of stars. "Because hope is stronger than pain, because freedom is worth more than fear." Even those who mocked him found themselves thinking of his words long after leaving his cell. Soldiers who had once taken pride in cruelty now lay awake at night, questioning the empire they served. Some even dreamed of Earth, a world they had never seen, but now imagined as a place where people lived with fire in their hearts, refusing to bow to chains. The prisoner had become a spark, and sparks were dangerous inside dry wood. The commander, sensing this shift, grew desperate. He ordered one last test, a final display meant to crush both the prisoner and the whispers spreading through his crew. He demanded the man be brought to the execution chamber, not to kill him yet, but to display his suffering before the entire garrison. Hundreds of soldiers gathered to watch. The commander declared loudly, "Today you will see the end of human Defiance. Today you will see him shatter." The human stood weakly under the harsh lights, his body trembling from exhaustion. But when he looked at the sea of alien faces before him, he saw not only cruelty. He saw doubt. He saw curiosity. And he saw something even greater, respect. With a breath that seemed to carry the weight of every scar, he lifted his head and spoke. His voice was low but steady, echoing in the silence that fell across the chamber. "You think breaking me will show your strength, but it only shows your fear. Because if I can stand here, chained and beaten, and still defy you, then you have already lost. You can kill me, but you cannot kill what I carry. And what I carry is not mine alone. It belongs to all of humanity." The silence that followed was heavy, more powerful than any scream. The soldiers shifted, looking at each other, their commander, and finally back at the man they were supposed to see as weak. For the first time, some of them lowered their weapons. For the first time, the empire itself seemed fragile. The commander shouted in rage, his voice echoing across the chamber, but his words no longer held the same power. He had lost something that could never be regained, the unquestioning obedience of his soldiers. That night, the prisoner was returned to his cell. His body was frail, his wounds deep, yet his spirit seemed taller than the stars. And though he lay in chains, it was no longer he who was the captive. The empire itself was chained by his defiance, its strength corroded by one unbroken man. The lesson of defiance. The commander had built his reputation on cruelty and fear. His soldiers had always obeyed without question, believing their leaders. Strength unshakable and his will absolute. But everything began to crumble the longer the human remained unbroken. What should have been a simple victory, a single prisoner crushed into submission, had instead become a quiet rebellion spreading inside the very heart of his warship. And the commander, for all his power, could feel it slipping through his claws. He had not destroyed the human. He had created a symbol, and symbols were far harder to kill than flesh. In desperation, he called for one final act. He ordered the chamber prepared for the ultimate test, not torture this time, but annihilation. The plan was simple: destroy the prisoner's body so completely that nothing remained to inspire defiance. The guards obeyed with stiff movements, their silence heavy with unease. As they dragged the human once more into the chamber, many of them refused to meet his eyes. For they knew, deep down, that this was no longer about a man. It was about a truth that frightened even them, that chains and whips could not control everything. The human's body was broken, yet he stood tall in spirit. His arms trembled as they were bound, his knees nearly gave way, but still he lifted his head and stared at the commander with eyes that burned brighter than the lights above them. The commander stepped forward, his voice filled with fury and desperation. "This ends tonight," he growled. "Your silence has poisoned my soldiers. Your defiance has spread like disease. I will show them your end, and they will remember only your failure." But before he could continue, the human spoke. His voice was low, raw, but steady, carrying across the chamber with the weight of truth. "You still don't understand, do you? My end is not failure. My end is victory. Because even if you kill me, I will not die broken. And if I stand unbroken, then all of humanity stands with me." The words cut through the chamber like thunder. The guards froze, some turning, their eyes away from their commander and toward the prisoner. Their hearts, long bound in chains of fear, felt something stir that they had never known before: respect, and worse still, admiration. One by one, soldiers began to hesitate. The commander screamed at them to continue, to prepare the machines, to obey. But the more he shouted, the weaker his authority became. For every word of anger that left his mouth, the human's silence and calm defiance seemed louder. The machines roared to life, filling the chamber with a violent hum. Lights burned red, shadows stretched across the walls, and the tension was so thick that even the air seemed to tremble. Yet the human did not flinch. Instead, he smiled, a faint broken smile that shook the empire to its core. "You cannot destroy what does not belong to you," he whispered. "My body is yours to break. My spirit is mine to keep." And in that moment, something broke, not within the prisoner, but within the empire itself. The guards, who had once mocked him, now refused to carry out the order. Weapons lowered, eyes turned away from the commander's wrath. Some even stepped back, their loyalty shattered by the strength of a single chained man. The commander's voice rose into a scream of rage, demanding obedience, but the more he screamed, the more alone he became. His empire, his soldiers, his power, all slipping through his claws because one human refused to bend. The chamber fell into silence, the machines still humming, the chains still rattling, but no one moved. Finally, the commander realized the truth he had fought to deny. He had not conquered this prisoner. He had been defeated by him, not through strength, not through weapons, but through something far greater: defiance. That word, once meaningless, to his people, now stood like a mountain they could not climb. With a snarl of frustration, the commander turned away, his rage burning but his power gone. He could no longer force his men to act, for the prisoner's spirit had already conquered them. The human, though frail and near death, had become something more powerful than any empire could imagine, a symbol of unyielding will, a lesson written in scars and silence. As the guards escorted him back to his cell, they no longer touched him with cruelty. Some even walked with bowed heads, as if ashamed, and the man, though his body trembled, carried himself with quiet pride. For he had shown them all that humanity was not weak, not fragile, not breakable. He had shown them what it meant to stand, unbroken. That night, whispers spread through the ship, whispers that would travel farther than the stars themselves. The human did not break, they said. The human stood unbroken. And those words carried power, a power that would ripple beyond the walls of the chamber, beyond the halls of the ship, beyond the empire itself. For once, a lesson, like, "That is learned, it cannot be forgotten," and so the story of one man, chained and tortured, became something far greater. It became a warning to the empire and a promise to humanity, that no matter the chains, no matter the pain, no matter the darkness, the human spirit would rise again, defiant and unshakable. The aliens had tried to shatter him, but instead, they discovered the greatest weapon of all, the unbroken will of humanity.
Thank you for joining Eternal Human Spirit, where humanity always rises again.